is now my pleasure first to introduce Erica Bryant to the stage. Erica Bryant is Associate Director of Writing at the Vera Institute of Justice, which has since 1961 fought to end mass incarceration. You may all know her as she spent 16 years here as a reporter, columnist, and editorial writer for the Democrat and Chronicle. She was the lead writer on the editorial board campaign to prevent childhood lead poisoning in Rochester. She conducted an investigation that showed that a Rochester man with severe mental illness who had not been convicted of a crime was nonetheless being held pre-trial at Attica. And she was always very proud to cover all the news in her hometown. We thank her so much for agreeing to moderate our panel discussion. Thank you, Erica.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here and an honor to facilitate this conversation between these two great leaders of our community. And our two panelists really need no introduction, but I am happy to welcome them to the stage and thank them for making time for this conversation with us. Mayor William A. Johnson Jr. was the 64th mayor of Rochester, serving from 1994 to 2005. He made history as the first African American elected to hold this office, which I remember as being a very big deal. Prior to his election, he served 21 years as the president and CEO of the Urban League of Rochester, and as mayor, many considered him a leader with vision who was not afraid to take risks. He has long been a proponent of regionalism and metropolitan planning, and in 2002, he convened the Rochester Conversation on Mid-Sized Cities that we are responding to today. And he also plays the organ. Mayor Malik Evans is our city's 71st mayor. He previously served on Rochester City Council as an at-large member and also on the Rochester City School Board, including several years as its president. He was one of the youngest members to have joined the school board, possibly the youngest when he started many years ago. Prior to becoming mayor, Mayor Evans worked as an officer in the banking industry for more than 20 years, holding various leadership positions at M&T Bank Corporation and the ESL Federal Credit Union. He used to play the piano, but no longer does. But he does enjoy concerts and movies. So to start our evening, Mayor Johnson, let me please ask you to share the reasons with the audience that you convened the Rochester Conversation on Mid-Sized Cities in 2002.
Yes, thank you.
Was it on?
It says this is wireless.
Let me see.
Does it turn on?
Let's see. Okay, try it.
Okay, thank you. I'm delighted to be here and have spent the afternoon listening to the panelists. Back in 2002, I was about to leave office in 3 years, and it was 1 year before I ran for county executive. Had been dealing with, and I had been grappling with this issue for a while, that as a mid-sized city, and many of my colleagues would concur with this, we got lost in coverage in the national media. There's a lot of innovation that came out of cities like Rochester, not just in the industrial and commercial sectors, but a lot of governmental innovation. And the only time we seem to have gotten recognized was when something negative happened. Kodak announcing that it was downsizing, the city experiencing a rash of violence. Anything negative tended to get covered. Anything positive tended to get overlooked. And so part of that discussion was, how do we get better attention for the positive things? If you're trying to market your city as a place where the livability standard is high, where the costs are moderate, where there are a variety of outlets for recreation and entertainment. People have got to know that you exist. And if the only thing they hear is that people get killed, get shot, get maimed and wounded, if the only thing they hear is that your iconic companies are going through a downturn, people are likely to stay away. So that was the genesis for this discussion. It was small. We had 6 mayors who came to Rochester. I was one of the 6. I was already here. We had a lot of academics, Ford Foundation, Rockefeller Foundation people who came, people who were really focused on urbanism and urban issues. And it was a 2 or 3 day conference where we really rolled up our sleeves and began to strategize. A lot of the content that happened at that session did not get reflected in the report that was produced afterwards. And it's because of this report that Professor Brown, who was in high school here at the time and probably didn't even know that this conference had been held, but he somehow ran across a copy of it. It's because of this record that we are here today. And I think the issues that we looked at 21 years ago are as pertinent today as they were then, but with a caveat that the city looks a lot different today than 21 years ago. And in some respects, it looks better, and in some respects, it looks worse. But we are where we are, and it is really helpful to have people think about these things. I can assure you that Mayor Evans thinks about these things every day. And sometimes the resources, as Mitch Gruber was most articulate in describing, are not there. So the short answer is it was really an exercise in trying to project ourselves to a place where we all wanted to be. Every mayor I know, including my predecessor, Mayor Ryan, and everyone who succeeded me, says we want to be the best mid-sized city in America. That should be more than a theme, but it's been consistently an aspiration of everyone who's occupied the mayor's office.
Thank you. Mayor Evans, you were in college at the University of Rochester in 2002, correct?
I was. I graduated actually in 2002, but at that time I also was working for City Hall at the time as a legislative aide at the time for Rochester City Council. So I moonlighted working for City Council, and in '99 I was an intern in the mayor's office for a little while. So I was on the periphery of city government at the time.
So in your trajectory from intern all the way now to mayor over the past 20 or so years, in what ways would you characterize the city as having changed, and in which ways would you say it's the same, and what has gotten better and what's gotten worse, in your opinion?
Well, I think one of the things, let's start with the things that haven't changed, that's still the same and hasn't changed. New York State, on one hand, has made unprecedented investments as it relates to infrastructure that I don't think that you saw in previous years. But with some things that haven't changed but that need to change, and they're still working on it right now, they're in Albany right now working on the budget, is Rochester continuously still gets less per capita than other upstate cities. And that was true 10 years ago, it was true 15 years ago, it was true 20 years ago, it's still true today. Every mayor has talked about that going back years, and we're still continuing to fight that fight. 2002, when Mayor Johnson, when Bill came into office, we came into office both at very similar times. He had come in at a time when Rochester had some of the highest homicide rates. When he came in 94, 93, had some of the highest homicide rates. He came in 93. I came in 2023, and we were coming off the highest homicide rates. But in 2002, if you look at the numbers, there were innovative programs that Mayor Johnson had put in place that had started to help bring down the violence in Rochester. So by the time he got into his term in 2002, you saw some challenges. So, but what's similar right now is we're dealing with violence challenges back then, but you didn't have that in 2002 because there had been improvement. So that gives me hope. Cycle. So that's important. I think there were always challenges with education. It was a challenge then. It was a challenge. It's been a challenge now. Good things that are still happening now that happened then also was the city's financial situation. Even though the city always had to sometimes make cuts, tighten its belts, and do all those things, other things, the city always had a great bond rating. Unlike a lot of other mid-sized cities that went through those challenges. It was true in 2002. It's still true now, and that's a challenge. And the city also generously supports its schools. 60 cents on every dollar goes to education. A lot of people don't know that. For any of its spend, 60 cents, and it was true then. And that's still happening right now as well. So lots of things. I think Mayor Johnson was extremely innovative. I think we're still innovative here. In Rochester, we're a part of the Mayor's Institute on urban design. We just got picked for that. We're a part of the Mayor's Institute on pedestrian safety. We have collaborations with Bloomberg, Harvard. We have a Center for Financial Empowerment from the National Centers of Financial Empowerment. So I think Rochester has always been interested in being innovative and cutting edge. I think that was true in 2002. I think that's true today as well. So the book of Ecclesiastes says that there's nothing new under the sun. So a lot of the challenges that we faced in 2002, I think we still face them now. I will say that a little bit what's different, though, is the challenges with violence. You always had challenges with violence, but the levels, the age levels, is extremely concerning. 12, 13-year-olds. That was rare. Back even when I was growing up, we had the levels of violence that were a challenge, but you're seeing much younger kids get involved in violence, and I think that's different and very concerning.
Can I take a second to elaborate on that last point? I'm technologically challenged here. I want to really elaborate on that last point. When Mayor Evans is correct, we came to office, violence was at its highest level in this community. The city had registered 73 homicides. For a city of its size, that was astounding. The cohort of people committing those crimes were between the ages of 17 and 29. Today, almost every day you turn on the news, you hear of a crime being committed by a 12, 13, and 14-year-old. These people are beyond the reach of the traditional, not only the criminal justice system, but when I was at the Urban League, we operated a number of delinquency diversion programs. There were ways to take these young people who were on the wrong path and try to put them on the right path with programs. We had family support programs so that when a child was engaged in delinquent acts, not only will we serve that individual, but the entire family. to try to stitch this back together. Today, almost every one of these young people committing these crimes is sent into the family court system. We don't know what happens. We don't even, well, we certainly don't know the name, and that's good, and I'm not speaking in a punitive sense, because if we don't know who they are, we don't know how to serve their families. We don't know how to treat them. And I've spoken to high school principals who told me that these young people, some of them come back to school because they're so young when they commit a criminal act. They come back to school, and they don't even know it. The principal is not even told that this person just came out of a juvenile correction facility. And I have spoken to family court judges, retired and current, and I said, all I want to know, I just want to be encouraged as a citizen that something is being done, that you're creating the kind of programs to help these young people. The mayor, they won't even tell the mayor. See, there's a disconnect here. And I only make the point to say that we had a better shot at solving this problem when we knew who the perpetrators were, we knew how we could reach them, either a job, get them back into school, do something, and we even had something called Operation Ceasefire, which was federally funded. That program worked very effectively to intervene with these young people. So I go to bed every night feeling very badly for the mayor who has to deal with a problem. I used to get called when there was a homicide in the middle of the night. He gets called because somebody has stolen a car from a working class person. There's a person who needs their car to get to work, and they get up in the morning, their car's not sitting in front of their house because somebody has stolen it. And what do? They're not even joyriding with it. They want to drive it into a building, grab it, smash and grab. I never heard that terminology before. So I think that this is the kind of thing we're talking about, the challenges that mid-sized communities, but it happens. It's not a Rochester phenomenon. It's not a Rochester phenomenon. And my last point I'll make is I was also blessed because I was probably the last mayor who wasn't a part of the social media generation. There was no Instagram. There was no Facebook. None of that stuff existed when I was mayor. Okay?
Elaborate on that, Mayor. Why are you glad?
Huh?
I said elaborate on that, please. Why are you glad?
I'm glad because at least we had a little bit of control of the narrative. Anybody can write the narrative. Anybody with a phone can write the narrative. My 4-year-old grandson can write the narrative if his parents gives him a phone. So I'm just sitting here shaking my head at where we are. Like I say, mayors of these communities in 2020 are dealing with some unbelievable activities. And the control, the ability to control them, I think, is de minimis.
There's a great article that everyone should read. It was in the Atlantic, and now I don't agree with this because I don't think that anything is impossible. Was it Susan B. Anthony that said failure is impossible? But there's an article in Atlantic, and it talks about the title is "The Impossible Job of Being a Mayor" in the current. But it's a good read. It's a good read for anyone that has not seen that if you haven't read it yet. A couple of mayors have sent it to me and said, do you agree with this? But it is a good read. But the social media point, the challenge with the social media point, particularly with young people, is unbelievable. I mean, the amount of young people that are engaged in violence as a result of what is on social media is, I've never seen anything like it. So that's a challenge. We have people who are fighting because of a beef on Instagram or something that they saw on Facebook. That, as the mayor said, Mayor Johnson said, he didn't have that. years ago. So you know that it's a double-edged sword. I mean, social media, everyone is now an influencer, whether or not they have 1 follower or 2 followers or 2 million.
So shifting topics a little bit towards the economy and jobs. When you convened the 2002 convention, Kodak was the largest employer. And now the shift in Rochester has been from manufacturing with things like film from Kodak or copying machines from Xerox to services, including education and medical service, with U of R being the largest employer. What are both of your thoughts about this shift? Do you believe that universities and medical centers can adequately replace our legacy industries? And has this shift been a negative one or just created different and new opportunities?
You know, I think that it's been a good thing for Rochester. And Rochester, believe it or not, our region, because we're such we got such brain power here, that we fared better than some of the other industrialized cities. You heard me say this in the State of the City the other night, and I quote someone who I respect a lot. You know, Michael Coleman, who was the mayor of Columbus, and he said, "Listen, Columbus was in the Rust Belt, but we're not a Rust Belt city." I say the same thing about Rochester, and I got to see this in the banking industry. As many clients that I had that were that had worked at Kodak or were suppliers of Kodak, that they were able to pivot their businesses into the new emerging economy that was there. I mean, so Rochester has been very good at that. But where we are, though, as a city sometimes, and we still suffer from this, is that we're like, and this is a sophisticated group, so you probably didn't watch Napoleon Dynamite. But those of you that have, we have what I call Uncle Rico's syndrome.
Oh.
And any of you that might know Uncle Rico is 50-something years old, but he still talks about his high school football days. If the coach would have put me in, we would have won states. Rochester's in that, for a while, I think we're starting to get out of it, is that same way. Oh, we still had Kodak. Oh, we just had Kodak. We just had Kodak, Xerox, and Bosch and Lomb. You know, we had these, you could come out of high school and you get a job. Well, we're not going back to those days. Those days are gone. We are no longer a company town. We are a town of different companies. And the quicker that we can embrace that mindset, I think the better off we are. I think that universities serve as great anchor institutions to be able to spin off other organizations and companies that can be able to do well. And I think that there are lots of companies that have emerged as successful places. They're smaller, they're medium-sized, but they are a nice complement to some of the larger anchor institutions like a University of Rochester and a medical center. We have to continue to cultivate those new emerging companies that are there. And I mentioned some of them the other night. Ocean Applied, you know, there was Cloud Checker. I mean, you can go on and on about some of the companies that many times you've never heard of them because they may not employ 10,000 people, but they might employ 500 people or 600 people. And the power of those companies can't be understated. The other thing that we have in Rochester going for us is that we have a strong entrepreneurial spirit. And if you remember, if 1 in 3 small businesses in America create at least 1 job, America could be at full employment. It shows you the power of the small businesses that we also have in Rochester. When I say small businesses, I mean companies with 5 or fewer employees, because those smaller companies become larger companies. And Rochester is great for that in terms of the different tech hubs that we have. And we're also on our way. I don't indulge in it. I don't urge anyone to be indulged in it, but we have a pretty, we will have a pretty, yesterday was 4/19, if you know what that means. No, yesterday was 4/20. Marijuana is medical marijuana, medical dispensaries over at the Eastman Business Park. That has become a major moneymaker for Rochester, and I think going to the future will be another one, another avenue that we will have, regardless of how you feel about marijuana or not. It's legal in New York State. That is a major, that will be a major economic driver, I believe, for Rochester. The first thing I did as mayor was, I'm probably the only mayor in Rochester's history that was on the cover of High Times magazine. which is interesting, as I said, my father probably will be turning in his grave. But we set up the Cannabis Preparation Commission because we said whether or not you think, whatever you think about marijuana or not, we had to make sure we get the zoning right, and we did all that. We said we have it all right. We created the conditions to be able to do that. So how do we pivot to these new economies? But what was amazing to me, and Mayor Johnson can talk more about this, was how fast Kodak went from like 10,000 employees to like, I mean, I think that just kicked the the wind out of Rochester, and I think that's why we sometimes had that Uncle Rico syndrome, because we didn't have time to prepare for it. It was just quick.
Well, I have a slightly different view. I think that without even identifying a particular employer, I think we have gone from an economy of stable employment to an economy of unstable employment. So if you go and get a 30-year mortgage on your house, you want to have some expectation that during that 30 years you will have the income to pay that mortgage. If you go and sign a 6-year note to buy an automobile, you want to have some expectation that you're going to be able to pay for that automobile. And in the economy as it currently exists, there are too many jobs that are fleeting. There are too many jobs where people don't have the stability and they make one wrong slip and they're out of the door, because labor is not a scarce commodity, and particularly now in the era of robotization. So rather than talk about Kodak, let me talk about another plant much smaller than the size of Kodak that existed in this community for well over 75 years. We call it Rochester Products. It was a part of General Motors. It used to employ about 10,000 people. And you could drive up Mount Reed Boulevard 24 hours a day, and there would be cars in the parking lot. 3 shifts, people working. Now you go up Mount Reed and there's hardly a car parked in the parking lot. If you go inside, as I did and I was given a tour, a plant that employed close to 10,000 people can now operate with less than 200. Because they got machinery. Machinery that never wants a day off, machinery that never calls in sick, machinery that doesn't argue with the boss. You just press the button. My last employer was RIT. While I was there, what do they call it, Rebecca? What is it they're going to have this Saturday? Innovative Weekend? Imagine RIT. Imagine RIT. And so every day they are training students to create new technologies, to come up with new ideas of innovation. And unfortunately, every one of those ideas leads to, almost everyone, leads to a reduction in the dependence on labor. So, my good friend Mitch Gruber said in his presentation, he talked about his alma mater, the University of Rochester, which is our largest employer, which contributes very little in terms of property taxes, because it is a tax-exempt organization. Okay? And we look at that, and government looks at that, because we live off of the property tax. That we need tax revenue in order to provide services. But if we don't have people who are working, they can't contribute. They don't buy the property. That's why we have so many vacant houses in the city. So anyway, the point I'm making here is I don't want to sound like an old person longing for the past, you know. But I'm saying that, and now with artificial intelligence, I have heard the people who create artificial intelligence say they don't give a damn about the number of jobs that are going to be lost. All they're concerned about is the improvement in efficiency. Well, they better figure out what to do with all these idle people. And it's not going to be kids riding around crashing into places. It's going to be old folks trying to figure out, where do I get food? So, but the mayor's correct. All of it falls in his lap, because when things are not going well, people immediately single out the elected officials and say, what are you doing about this problem? What are you doing about this problem? And in many instances, it's not even in our purview.
No.
And in other instances, we don't have the resources, the adequate resources, to solve the problem.
So jumping off of that, then, to what extent are community leaders in mid-sized cities, mayors like you in Rochester, able to shape the future of the city, given that you are captive to many forces outside your control, from global economics to artificial intelligence?
It is absolutely critical that, first off, any person that comes into the office of mayor, first off, every mayor or most elected official has an ego, because you got to have an ego in order to put your name on a ballot and run for office. But if you come in with an ego where you think that you have all the answers and you can do it by yourself, you are in deep trouble. Because as the mayor said, so many of the issues are so outside your purview. I don't know if Simeon Bannister is still here, but there he is back there. I mean, the Community Foundation is an example of a partner that the city has to have. The county executive, me and the county executive, we got an emergency meeting on Monday that we're having around smash and grabs, because it's affecting everybody in the county. We got to bring everybody to get together to be able to have those issues. If you look at a lot of the funds in which I'm doing things in Rochester right now, it's the result of the federal government, who gave over $200 million. The county also got a similar allotment, probably about over 170 something. We're doing with the state. So we're looking to have to try to stitch these things together, and then bring in the private sector like never before, because there is no way just with the city's tax base that we could do half of the things that I'm doing right now. It wouldn't happen, because as the mayor said, we live off of three things: property tax, sales tax, and state aid. Property tax, you can only tax people so much. And remember, the home ownership rate in Rochester is only about 37%. So we're a city majority of renters. We're trying to change that, because that number is too low as far as I'm concerned. And we have people that pay more for their rent than I pay for my mortgage. So we need to work on change. So we're working on changing that. But you can't tax. You can't get blood from a stone. So how am I going to go? If I got a senior that's been living on Champlain Street for 50 years, her house is paid off. I can't tax. Let's say her name is Ms. Jones. I'm making that up, right? I can't. You think when the budget comes out in about 2 weeks, if I say, oh yeah, we're going to raise, because we have all these challenges, we're going to raise property taxes by 40%. Wouldn't happen, right? I'd be run out of town. So you can't go there. State aid. You heard what I said about that. Every mayor, going back to Nathaniel Rochester, has been trying to get their fair share from Albany. And then so sales tax is a place where we can hope to get, right? You grow that, businesses, people supporting businesses, all those things. But even that is at the will of the economy. Remember, sales tax almost went to zero. I was chairing the City Council Finance Committee meeting, when COVID hit. I don't turn red much, but looking at those numbers, when we literally shut down the economy, you literally stopped all sales tax revenue from coming in, because all the businesses, it was frightening, furloughing people and all that stuff. So you're at those market forces. And so when you're in a city that's challenged like that, so you have to. So how you get that innovation, how you get that collaboration, how you get those other things is you have to really be an ambassador, almost like an octopus with all types of different tentacles, to be able to work with the community foundation, to be able to work with other levels of government, to be able to work with the federal government, to be able to work with the state government, to be able to work with the business sector, to try to stitch something together that will allow people to see that the only way Rochester can be successful is by everyone doing their various part. And I think that has helped in terms of helping to try to sustain Rochester as we go forward.
You want to respond to that? So, speaking about the need for collaboration, and in the last panel, there was discussion of need for a metropolitan approach. And you were praised as a person who has not been afraid to speak out in favor of more metropolitan government. Over the past 20 years, do you think that we've made any progress towards that goal? Or do you think that opposition is still too strong?
I don't think, well, first place, the structures of government in New York don't allow for an easy transition. For example, we all decry the number of school districts we have. But except for New York City, there is no county-wide school district anywhere in New York State, except in the more rural counties. But people move to North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia, and they move to those places. And while they would resist sending their children, if they lived in Monroe County, to a school on the other side of the county, in the city, if they moved south, they're county-wide schools. They're county-wide school systems. So until the law of New York State changes, at that level, we're not going to have it. But I would tell you, it was an interesting discussion. In 2002, something else happened, probably before this group met. In my State of the City address in 2002, I called for the merger of the city of Rochester with the county of Monroe. And it was always a point of amusement. The person who would have benefited from that more than anybody would have been the county executive and the county legislature. And the county executive was the strongest opposition to that idea. But there's a reason for doing that. The county's tax base, they're taxing on a larger base. But not only that, I don't know what the number is now, Mayor, but in my time, the county was only taxing at 22% of its taxable value. The city was almost at 90%. The city had very little margin to raise tax. Even if we wanted to, we couldn't have done it without violating the state law. The county was taxing. They had the ability on a larger base to raise the tax by a few pennies, and they would generate millions or more dollars, and they refused to do that. So we have to really get to the mindset of people who look at the city as some horrible place, a place not to be helped, not a central part. They don't view this as a part of Monroe County. It's the city, and therefore we can't do anything to help the city out of its crisis. So there are just a lot of issues. Mayor Ryan, my predecessor, one of the things he harped on the most was the growth of the city school district budget. Now, as a former school board member, Mayor Evans may disagree with this, but the city school district budget today is double what the city of Rochester's budget is. And it's almost 70% higher than when I was mayor. And when I was mayor, they had 44,000 students, and now they're close to 20,000 students. I can't figure out what they're spending the money on. To be perfectly honest, I cannot figure it out. But they continue to get more state aid than the city. So there are just some internal dynamics that have to be changed before we can really go to this idea of a regional approach. And it makes a lot of sense that you don't have the duplication. You can merge functions. You have several governments doing the same thing in terms of hiring. You know, we have two separate civil service commissions. There's just a lot of things that make a lot of practical sense that are not getting done. And it's not because of historical reasons, it's because of structural barriers that have been put in place to prevent any movement or any change.
So what state or federal policies would you say most hinder the development of the mid-sized city, specifically Rochester? And conversely, what kinds of policies or investments from bigger rings of government could most help?
Well, I mean, we know cities are creatures of the state. But to the mayor's point, to Mayor Johnson's point, for example, I can't go annex. I'm not saying the state should change the law to allow me to do this, but I can't go annex Brighton, and I'm sure Brighton would like to get some of the city back that it got back, that we took away, Cobb's Hill and Park Ave. I'm sure they would like to get some of that back. So I mean, it's hard for the city to grow by taking over other smaller municipalities. So we can't go back and say, all right, we want to take back Dispatch, New York, which is now called East Rochester, and say, you know what, you're gonna be part of the city of Rochester again to help us grow our tax base. Or go to Brighton, which is right, literally on the border of the city, or Arundequay. You can't do that to be able to grow. So when you look at a lot of some of the other cities, like Ohio or Cleveland, I mean, a lot of them really grew from gobbling up other areas. And I can't remember what year that law changed. Whoever was an historian here might remember. But it was a long time ago where we weren't able to do that anymore. So that's I'm not saying that it should be changed or anything, but that is a challenge for growth. The school district is still a challenge. I have a unique experience. I mean, I got most of the gray hair I have now from the school board. It's a challenge, and we have to figure that out. I mean, I've been a supporter of Great Schools for All. If any of you are familiar with them, they wanted to try to motto after regional academies and schools. Those are the types of conversations that we should be having. How we can be more efficient. But I think the other thing that the federal government has not done anything on, and I know it's a hot button topic, is guns, right? That is a major challenge for Rochester. New York State, we have some of the best gun laws, but if you go to Pennsylvania, it's like the Articles of the Confederation, right? It really makes no iota of difference, sadly. You can have the toughest gun laws you want in New York, but you can just go over the border in Pennsylvania and get whatever you need, or go down to Georgia or in Florida, where they just you don't even need a permit to carry, and those guns make their way up here. We're going to be having a gun trace data report that we're going to be releasing, I think, hopefully before the end of the month, and it will show where a lot of the guns come from, and I mean, but policies like that at the federal government level definitely are a challenge for us, because what happens in Georgia, Pennsylvania, and Ohio has a major effect in Rochester, particularly as it relates to gun policy. And just let me say, before anybody say I'm violating the Second Amendment, I got my grandfather hunted, people hunt. I'm all for the Second Amendment, but I'm not for illegal guns making their way into Rochester, and I don't think you need an AR-15 to go hunt a deer. But that is a major challenge. I read the reports, and it'll say you can talk to the U.S. Marshal, you can talk to the ATF. I meet with these folks quarterly, and they'll say, oh yeah, that gun came out of Georgia, gun came out of. So that's a major challenge. The other thing is that because Congress has been paralyzed, they did help with the American Rescue Plan Act. That was very excellent. But during the pandemic, I think it was in 2021, we moved about 40% of people, 40% of children out of childhood poverty. You know why? Because we had an enhanced earned income tax credit. So if we could do that, come on. We did it in 2021, now it's 2023. Guess what? That's gone away. That's a policy that affects Rochester in a major way, and that's a federal policy. And it was simple. They just you didn't have to do anything. You just you got the check. You know what that did for families during that time period? People still worked. They still did whatever they needed to do, but that literally lifted and the Children's Defense Fund has the information on this, has the data on this, it lifted hundreds of millions of children and their families out of poverty, just a simple tax code thing. But now, you think that would happen now? Good luck. Nothing's going to happen for the next 18 months in Washington, which is sad. But so those are the types, I think, federal things that are extremely challenging for us, and they affect particularly medium-sized cities, particularly cities with high levels of poverty. Rochester, 5 of the poorest zip codes in New York State are in Rochester. The top 3 poorest zip codes in New York State are in the city of Rochester. For a city our size, we got New York City, got Buffalo, which is bigger than us. That's a challenge, and that should scare all of us. And it tells you the challenges that we have to overcome in our city currently.
The structure of government is obsolete. It's an 18th century model that can't effectively work in the 21st century. And the inertia, the opposition, the resistance that exists at the state level to make any fundamental changes is really simply amazing. Now, I don't think too much about those big problems like, are we going to ever find, are we going to soon find an effective way to control the amount of violence that is caused by guns? But I want you to think about something very simple. And if you live in the city of Rochester, and if you live anywhere near the borders, see, I live 2 blocks from the Brighton town line. All right? You go down my street, I live off of Southwind Road, I go down 2 blocks to Highland, and I immediately am in the town of Brighton. All right? And on the south side of Highland Avenue, people, their front yard is in the city of Rochester, their backyard is in the town of Brighton. Now that works very effectively on one level. Because if you got school-aged children, you can decide to send your child to the school where your backyard is. Higher quality of education is presumed. But think about when it snows. Snowplows are expensive. Snowplows go down Southwind Road, and rather than being able to go all the way over to the 12 corners, when they get to Highland Avenue, they have to turn around. In Arundicourt, when they get to East Ridge Road, they have to turn around. In Henrietta, when they cross whatever the line is, they have to turn around. And you say to yourself, why can't we have an arrangement that creates more efficiency? Why do we have to have 19 highway superintendents and a public works director in the city of Rochester? These are the kinds of things that get people really annoyed, because that's why government does not operate in an efficient and an effective way. But people make real determinations, because it's not just the snowplow, it's not just the schools, but there's something more important. There's the zoning ordinances that each municipality has, which effectively, when Simeon talked about diversity, which effectively determines who will and who will not live in those jurisdictions. And that's why people fight so hard to preserve that, even though it's going to cost them money, even though you can make a case. When I ran for county executive, that's what I ran on. How to make county government more responsive and more, and they said, oh, we're not going to let you run on that issue, Bill Johnson. We're going to scare people to death and tell them if you elect Bill Johnson as county executive, he's going to take over your school district. Anybody old enough to remember Pac-Man?
I remember.
I was the Pac-Man. I was the Pac-Man. put this guy in the county office building, and he's going to suck up your town, your village, your school district. It was a totally irrational argument. But you know what? It worked. And my point is, we got to move, if we want to really talk about how to improve the plight of this city, we've got to get people to have rational discussions about, you know, the city of Rochester has features that doesn't exist anywhere else in this county. Built-in resources and that people don't mind sharing. Let me tell you one thing. The people who live out in Parrington, they don't have any fear to come downtown during the Rochester International Jazz Festival, all right? You know what? They don't have any fear on Saturday morning to go to the Rochester Public Market. There are assets in this city that should not be replicated. Why do we need 16 or 17 public markets? So I think that what we're talking about now is how do we have this kind of rational discussion that talks about the efficient and effective way of deploying our public resources and who should benefit from the deployment of those resources. When you get old, you can think like this.
Oh, that's interesting to think about how much better of a society would be if decisions were based upon rational criteria. But I feel like,
and it's funny, to your point, rational decision. I mean, you find that, and this is something that we can't solve. There's much less rational conversations. It used to be back in the day. You used to be able to have conversations about education in a room like this. But now, you start talking about charter schools, public. I mean, people almost come to blows. I was in a room where people almost came to blows. It's much more difficult to have rational conversations. I think social media has exacerbated that because you have an echo chamber where you can have a group of people who all agree on the same thing. So it's much harder for me than it was when Mayor Johnson was mayor to kind of facilitate these type of conversations, particularly around when you know they might be quote unquote controversial, and we know rationality does not matter, because I forgot who it was that said, you have your truth, but I have my own truth. I have alternative facts, right? I mean, there is no alternative facts. Here's where the border of the city of Rochester in Brighton is. This is where the sun is. This is what. None of that. It's harder now to have those difficult conversations. And then there were places where you didn't have a lot of this stuff creep in. You might have had challenges. You've always had challenges in education, but now even school boards, not the city school board. It's always had interesting stuff. But I mean, suburban, rural school districts. I used to go to those school boards conferences. They were boring. I mean, it wasn't. You just did not have. It wasn't crazy. They weren't talking about banning books and any of that stuff. This is all, like, I don't even know. I mean, it's odd. It's odd, and it's hard to have those conversations even about facts. We had slavery in the country. The Civil War was from 1861 to 1865. Those types of things, those types of conversations, you can't even really have those anymore, which is bad for the future of our country and for our children. And so the question is can cities survive and be a place that can kind of cultivate those types of environments? Can mayors bring people together as a way to try to do that? It's definitely not happening at the federal level. I can tell you that right now. And one of the things President Biden talks about is why he brought so many mayors. He has more mayors in his cabinet than any other president in history, because when Bill brought this conference together in 2002, it's always been, so far, the mayors that have been on the front line of doing the innovative and creative things and bringing people together around conversations. But I'm concerned that even that could be lost if we go the way of some of the just kooky, crazy conversations that we're seeing that are taking place across our country.
so a question for both of you, going back to the 2002 time in the prior conference. What were Rochester's peer mid-sized cities then, and how does it compare to those cities today? So, for example, if Austin and Pittsburgh and Buffalo might have been considered peers, does Rochester seem different from them now?
Well, see, that number always changes. I go back and use as a reference point Rochester's high mark, the year of its highest population was in the 1950 census, and it was the 33rd largest city in the U.S. And the 32nd largest city was San Diego, and the 34th largest city was Atlanta. And they have long since passed, and Rochester's been going down. I think, who said it? Rochester's the 110th largest city now, something like that. But, so the peer thing keeps changing. But I would say, back in my time, we could be compared rather easily to, not even Buffalo, because Buffalo was viewed as a much larger city. See, any city that had a major league sports franchise,
Okay.
one or more, was viewed as a major city. We are in that category with Akron or Toledo. Well, Toledo's a little larger. All right. Louisville, places like that, okay? And I think I haven't taken the time to really see where those cities were. If I can look around where we were, because we were like in 1990, we were like the 55th largest city. And I just can't tell you who was in that percentile that we were in. But I would say this, the cities that have fared the best are the cities in the Sun Belt. You know, in 1950, there's cities in California that even exist, and they are now well up in terms of ranked communities. So the Sun Belt has prospered more than the Northeast. I agree with you about using the term Rust Belt, but certainly we can talk about cities in the Northeast that have not fared as well as cities in the South and the East and the South and the West.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at some cities, like if you look at a city like Austin, I mean, where you have almost between 500 and 1,000 new people moving there on a weekly basis. I mean, these are cities 22 years ago that weren't really on people's, radar. So, it's amazing to look at the peers now. So, I mean, it changes in terms of who you compare yourself to. Buffalo's much bigger, but I still look at what Buffalo's doing, what Mayor Brown's doing down in Buffalo. I still look at Cleveland, even though they're bigger, Pittsburgh, and even though they're bigger cities, they still have a lot of the same challenges that we have. Cities that are in that 200 to 275 area are the cities that I look at a lot.
And are there any, sorry to interrupt, but are there any success stories that you would highlight?
Yeah, I think if you look at Buffalo, it used to be that Buffalo would always look at Rochester and say, "Oh, you guys are the ones that we're doing." But remember, Buffalo got that Buffalo billion, and that had a serious effect. And we need a Rochester billion. I don't know if we'll ever get it, but we need a Rochester billion. That Buffalo billion absolutely transformed Buffalo. I think if you talk to Mayor Brown, he will tell you that. I've done probably 1 or 2 trips to Buffalo since I've been mayor to look at some of the things that they've done, particularly around their waterfront and canal side, the stuff that we're trying to do with our Rock the Riverway initiative. They had a regional revitalization partnership. We got funds for a $78-80 million regional revitalization partnership that they had, where they worked with foundations and where they work with foundations and the public and private sector to do that. We did get funds for that last year that we're looking to add to do some of those same things. So it's interesting how it's kind of flipped, because it used to be that Buffalo would look at Rochester and say, "Hey, what are you doing?" And now we're looking at them. I think that I can change that. But I mean, it's going to take work, time, but it takes resources. But that huge infusion in Buffalo, it made a difference because money talks and BS walks, and that that definitely has I believe transformed Buffalo.
I think we missed I hate to bring up a sore subject, but I think we missed a huge opportunity with the demise of the ferry. People look at that in different ways, but here's the way it was reconceived. See, it was initially born as a private sector venture. And slowly, government's money was needed, for example, to dredge the port, to make it a deep, what do they call it, deep harbor port, so that a boat that size could come in. But here was the vision behind the ferry. You were connecting a mid-sized city in the U.S. with one of the largest cities in North America. And the opportunities that never really got fully exploited, all right? Yes, a lot of people drive the thruway from upstate New York, from Massachusetts, from the east, to go to Toronto. It's a very, very magnetic city of plus 4 million plus people. But there are things in Canada, things in the U.S. that don't exist in Canada. And, for example, we had visions one time of creating a connector from Charlotte to the Monroe County Airport because of the high cost of intercontinental travel between Canada and the U.S. Just like a lot of people in the U.S. go to Canada to travel to the Caribbean, it is cheaper than flying out of Rochester or New York or Philadelphia. People would go to Toronto, take flights into Jamaica and other Caribbean places. A lot of Canadians who like to go to Florida and other places, the flights were cheaper out of Rochester. So that vehicle, that vessel, could serve a purpose. But we got caught up. And I was amazed at the number of people who downed it saying, who would come from Canada to Rochester? Who would come from Canada to Rochester? Without examining that there was a well thought out strategy to attract those Canadians to come to upstate New York. Tourism was one of our best industries. So I think we missed out on that opportunity. It'll be a long time because this is a very expensive venture before something like that is created again. But when we talk about our history of innovation and creativity, I think that's one we lost out on. And it's not because I was involved with it, because I think I could see, and a lot of people saw the bigger picture that was not being seen by a lot of others. And I will say to you, I did not kill the ferry. My successor killed the ferry. Just remember that. If I had been in office in 2006, there would have been a fast ferry because we had a plan to refinance it. And so I don't want to argue history. Bob Duffy and I are good friends, but I still think the point of the matter fact is we lost out on a real opportunity.
Can I ask something about transportation in general? You know, I like the train. I'm happy that you know thank God the infrastructure bill got passed. But one of the things that's been a challenge, I think, in our country and has affected mid-sized cities like Rochester too, has been the lack of what I just call horrible transportation. You go over to other countries. Why should I should be able to leave here today, and if I wanted to go over to Batavia or Buffalo, I should be able to get on a train and get there in 15 or 20 minutes, or to Albany, or think about that. In the 21st century, you can't do any of that. I mean, I like trying to take my kids on the train. I'm like, maybe I'll take the train to Cleveland. Good luck. or Pittsburgh to try to figure that out. Oh my, finagling it. They finally brought the train back to Toronto, which I was happy about. But, you know, God bless Louise Slaughter. She probably would be telling me amen up from heaven. We just have not invested in 21st century infrastructure like they have in Europe, like they have in China, between cities. I mean, why should it take, and I know this because I was at a conference in New York City, the plane got canceled 3 times. I said, okay, I'm gonna take the train. The train took 6 hours. Think about that, 6 hours, in 2000, it was last year, 22, it takes 6 hours on a train when we have all this technology all around the world, and you can get the cities in Europe, they're doing, it just makes no sense, and that's an area where I'm hoping that maybe this infrastructure bill will help. I mean, we are so behind in terms of that type of technology, and it really affects us mid-sized cities. It really affects us mid-sized cities. Like cities like Rochester, even cities like Cleveland, even affects cities like that. So that's always been my dream, that the federal government will say, you know what, we need to build an infrastructure so at least maybe my grandkids could get on a train and be in Buffalo in 15 minutes, and vice versa. Imagine what that would be able to do for our cities and our economies and all those things. I mean, it's a very, very sore point for me, and I hope we improve it one day.
Well, let me say quickly, I'm old enough, when I was a kid, passenger rail had a dominance over freight rail, and the tracks were built for passenger trains. Now, it's just the opposite. But we don't invest, as the mayor said. The first time I visited our sister city in France, Rennes, I took a train from Paris to Rennes. All right? 2 hours. Trains traveling at speeds of 125 miles per hour consistently. I mean, if you're looking out the window, something just blurs by you, all right? We don't have that here. We've talked about it, but we cannot get it. And I'm old enough to remember when there was nonstop air service from Rochester to Albany. Plane might have been a little small, but you could get on a plane and fly. They discontinued that service, and the only way to get to Albany directly was either to drive or to take a train. And I can't tell you the number of nights that when I had to go to Albany, where I had to wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning and call Amtrak and ask for the location of the train, the eastbound train that was coming out of Chicago. Where was it? Because if it didn't get to Rochester by 6 a.m., I could not get to my meeting in Albany by 10. So I had to get up in the middle of the night just to determine whether I could ride the train. And sometimes that train rolls in here 3 and 4 hours late. Who can operate like that? So you're absolutely right. This is another reason our economy is suffering, because if I lived in Rochester, and I worked in Syracuse, I could get on the train in the morning and ride to Syracuse. But I can't get on the train in the morning and ride to Buffalo, because the westbound trains don't start running until the afternoon, and the eastbound trains run in the morning. It's just absolutely absurd. That's why I'm saying we got to stop operating on a 19th century model. Government needs to become a lot more efficient.
And now we would like to open it up to audience questions. If anyone has a question, is there a microphone that we can pass around, or we can, and then maybe our mayors can share theirs. Thank you.
Good morning, mayors. Afternoon, evening. I moved here about 50 years ago from the Southwest. Landed in the 19th Ward, landed in a community that I really loved. My kids went to Wilson High and graduated from there. And I came here, perhaps naively, to hear at least one thing that made me optimistic. And you guys have given a tremendous analysis of what's going on with little touches of optimism, but is there something I can take home to tell my wife to make her feel good again? Because and that's an exaggeration, obviously. But, you know, I don't know what to say. It's painful. And I'll stay.
Well, you know, I'm a glass half full guy, and I think one of the things that you can tell her is that, I mean, the city is seeing probably some of the largest investments in terms of infrastructure and other things that you haven't seen in probably, I would say, almost 70, 80 years. And that's I mean, think about it. We are, I don't know if it was Mark Twain or whoever that said, go buy land, they're not building anymore. We're building more land. I mean, we're going to turn the inner loop, which was a relic of the past that really separated neighborhoods. We're doing environmental justice and creating almost 20 plus acres. And you see what happened on Inner Loop East. I mean, that's something that you can tell her. I mean, our Rock the Riverway initiatives, hundreds of millions of dollars that will also result in lots of construction jobs that are going to allow us to really transform the city landscape. Main and Clinton, which has been an abomination for years. I mean, one of those corners, one of the four corners of Main and Clinton. That's underway. That's underway. Over $10 million in public investment and more in private investment that's going to be taking place there. More money being spent on workforce than ever before. So I think that while we have the challenges, you can't lose hope and you can't lose faith. And remember, as my mother used to always say, you have to keep the faith even if it's as small as a mustard seed. And the mustard seed is pretty small. But it is important to recognize the challenges, because if you just sugarcoat everything, you got to be transparent. You know, you got to talk about the good and bad. But I think that you can take those types of things forward. And remember, you live in a city. You live in one of the few cities in the country that has a 96-foot waterfall right in the middle of its downtown, surrounded by a river, a lake, and a canal. Not many other cities have that. And the question is how do we harness all of that to move our economy? And you know what? A lot of people, we have a lot of climate refugees. Yeah, California's nice and sunny, but guess what? They're coming here. Because snow is easier to deal with than a mudslide or an earthquake that's going to displace you all those times. So those are I think, some good things that you can tell your wife. And the other thing you can tell her is that you're going to take her to a nice dinner. And then all the other stuff you tell her about Rochester, she won't care.
Mayors, I appreciated that you were being both sobering and realistic, and one of you was being optimistic. But Mayor Evans, you talked at your State of the City address about the cusp that the city is on, and that the residents will decide which direction it's going to go. Given the background of all of your discussion and how much is not within the control of the city, I wonder how the residents decide and what the role of the neighborhoods is in that, especially given what Simeon talked about, the neighborhood, you know, what was the neighborhood empowerment teams and the bottom up, voice of the residents. I wonder how you see that.
Well, I see that. You know, I was a big, under Bill Johnson, we had Neighbors Building Neighbors, which was probably one of the best public sector engagement programs we ever had. I wrote a paper on it when I was in college. I was the youth representative on Sector 4, whatever one is on the west side. That's how I really got to learn about all of the stuff was as that youth representative, because I was at Wilson. So I got to watch Willie Lightfoot and Umar Mustafa as the Sally Steinwalks, all these names that you might remember from the 19th Ward. So that was important, and some of those sectors are still meeting, by the way. I think Sector 6 is still meeting. I think Sector 4 might still be meeting. I don't remember all the numbers. But what I meant by that is that if the community, if those neighborhoods, if those people in those neighborhoods say that we are not going to give up on Rochester, that we are going to hang in there with you, we will not fail, because government responds to what's happening in the community and with those neighborhoods. And if those neighborhoods continue to care, in Rochester, like I said, our neighborhoods are more than their statistics. You know, people say, oh, Hudson Avenue is tough. Yeah, but there's homeowners that live on Hudson Avenue that have lived there for 40 years or 50 years, and their grandkids have then come. Those are neighborhoods where people live. People forget that. Sometimes folks that don't live in the city, they just know what they see on TV. But there's flowers growing over on Hudson Avenue. There's flowers growing on Jefferson Avenue or Cuba Place. Yes, they have their challenges, but there are people who still live there and want to fight for their neighborhoods. So I think the question is how can City Hall make sure that we reach out a hand? And we've been talking about reinvigorating NBN, setting it up in such a way where it can outlast a mayor. So it's not predicated on City Hall. It can't be predicated on City Hall because what happened with NBN is, I don't even think how much money, it wasn't even that much money that was spent on that, but it was so powerful because it gave people the power to be able to be engaged. So how can you replicate that? It doesn't have to be called NBN, but how can you replicate where people feel as though they are connected to their neighborhood and that they can make a difference in the 21st century? And I think that that's where what I meant by in terms of neighborhoods and residents feeling as though they have that they have that power. Now they shouldn't do all the work. That's what you elect people to do. So not us saying you help us do it, but there's stuff there's these little ingredients that neighbors have the power to be able to do. You have all these mini mayors in cities. In city neighborhoods, they'll say, hey, you're the mayor, Mayor Evans, but this is Miss Smith. She's been living here for 40 years. She does this, she does that, she does the other thing, and all the people respect her. How do you bring the next generation of those folks to be able to do that?
So the job of the mayor, any mayor, is to project hope and optimism, and that was the mayor's theme for his State of the City the other night. The mayor campaigns and says, I can make things better. We can make things better. And that's what all citizens are looking for, to see evidence, how that's translated from rhetoric into action. And one of the things that has happened consistently in this city is that whether it's the resident, the person who occupies the mayor's office, or whether it's some citizen somewhere who comes up with an idea, new things do happen. New ideas do come. New programs do come. And it is incumbent for us to be able to translate that. Now, in my era, I was wholly dependent upon the news media, which is a shadow of itself today. But in its place has come social media. And I think it has its challenges. I think it has its opportunities. The point I'm trying to make here to anybody who's saying, why should I continue to live in Rochester, is to be able to understand where those positive assets are. What is it that makes us unique? And how do we capitalize on that? And fortunately, we have a lot of unique assets in this community. And the mayor's job is to ensure that you never forget that. In the gloomiest moments, there's always hope. There's always something that gives us joy, and we should resonate in that joy.
Thank you. First, I just want to say thank you. This has been fantastic. I'm going to harken back to the previous panel for a second to try to see if I can think my way through an answer to the question that was raised in that panel and then see what you think about that answer. So the conversation was about narratives and how the narratives, the stories that we tell, in this case about the city of Rochester and our community, shape how we imagine what we can do together. And I want to answer that question as an outsider because I'm not a native Rochesterian. I moved here a long time ago, not quite 50 years. But I have noticed in my time here that the way that the community seems to resolve its contradictions, as in the city of Rochester has a lot of great things to offer, but the city of Rochester is also one of the poorest cities in New York. The way it resolves that contradiction is by the fact, it seems to me, that when people use Rochester, the meaning changes. So sometimes people say, as you just did, Mayor Johnson, like, Rochester, why should people live in Rochester? You mean like Rochester, the actual city, the place that we're in, right? But too frequently around here, when people throw Rochester, they mean Rochester's so great, and then you find out they live in Webster. And then they just come in here to go eat at Trotta. And I'm not like mocking people who come in to eat at Trotta. My point is that that's the reason that the fast ferry doesn't work. When you said people like scrunched up their faces and went, why would any from Canada come to Rochester? They meant the city, right? Why are people going to land in Charlotte, basically, right? The ex post of the city. But when we want to praise Rochester, we're really talking about the larger community. So I live out here in Victor, I live in Webster, and the area is great. And my shorthand for that as a local is Rochester's wonderful. But then you're like, well, if Rochester's so wonderful, why can't this community educate its children together? Oh, no, those your children, city of Rochester, right? And then you tell me we can't even remove our snow together as a community, which just makes the problem that much starker to me. So I'm wondering about that. And again, I speak again as an outsider, but Rochester doesn't always mean Rochester here, in the same way that downtown doesn't always mean downtown. I live in the Park Ave neighborhood, and I have noticed in the past 3 years that when I tell people that, they say to me, oh, it must be so great living downtown. I go, I don't live. What are you talking? The first time I corrected this person like a lot, but the third time it happened, I just went, sure. I live right fine. I live downtown. But in other words, I think the Rochester usage is slipping into downtown now. And I'm wondering if that resonates with anyone else in the room, particularly the native Rochesterians who might have more experience with this phenomenon than I do.
Well, I guess it's just normal to do that, to identify yourself with the largest entity. Rochester is still the largest entity in Monroe County. The PGA golf tournament is coming up. It's at Oak Hill Country Club in Rochester, New York. No, it's not. It's in Pittsburgh. But who's ever heard of Pittsburgh? See what I'm saying? I grew up in a place called Lynchburg, and black residents would be ashamed to say they were from a place called Lynchburg, okay? But then I meet people, and they say, I'm from Lynchburg. I said, oh, where'd you grow up? I'm from Lynchburg. Oh, actually, I was born out in the county, but nobody ever heard of Forest. So it's Lynchburg. So I just think it's a kind of a phenomenon. But I think what you're saying, Rebecca, is you got to embrace it all. You can't just take the good parts when it's good for you and then reject the bad parts. If it's Rochester, it's Rochester. And if it's the schools, and part of the schools, some of them are great and some of them are not, then you got to make them all operate effectively. And the thing, somebody said it on that panel, maybe it was Justin, people walk away from that, all right? They take the part of the narrative that they like, but they don't want to invest the hard work. I never forget my friend Ed Doherty, who wrote the poverty report for the Rochester Area Foundation. Their report is written in 2 parts. The first part is the problem, and the second part is the solution. The solutions are painful. The solution talks about how you can't concentrate all the poor people in just one part of the community and think that they can somehow extricate themselves. And when you concentrate all the wealth in other parts of the community. So how do we blend this? How do we bring this together? And so Ed would tell me he would go to these groups, he would make his presentation, and he would say, well, I'm assuming you read the report, you know what the problem is, it's been widely publicized. Let's talk about the solution. No, hold on, before you get to that part, let's talk about the problem. Nobody wants to talk about the solution. But the solution is all of us working on the same page towards the same objective, to produce the same end result. And that's not what's happening. So we have got to figure out a way to generate that, have that conversation, to get people to say, if you love Rochester, you got to love all of it, the good and the bad, and you got to work to make the bad good. Pure and simple.
And I think we have time for one more question.
Mayor Evans, I listened to the State of the City address also, and I have to say, I found you to be a courageous man. To begin with, your son was amazing, and to follow that act was an act of courage. He was really terrific. It was quite remarkable. I also found your speech to be moving and inspiring. You're clearly a guy who has a passion and a vision for the future, and I want to tie in an element of the prior panel as well. When Mr. Bannister talked about neighbors building neighborhoods and our former mayor who initiated that program, and I'll add my support to comments from over here about the importance of connecting to community, and I would argue that it's structurally important, not just informally important. So I would encourage you to consider opportunities that would present themselves to create some structural connections. And let me shout out as well Erica Hernandez and the Neighborhood Service Center in my particular area, who I think does a terrific job with that team. I also want to support John Lamb's notion earlier where he said that he thought the downtown improvement district idea was perhaps in trouble, and I would argue perhaps fatally flawed. And I think the community probably needs something like that, even if that particular model is problematic. It's old school, it's smug town. So I'd like to encourage a broader conversation, authentic interaction with the community about a range of options, where it's not organized around the notion of an elite few making all the decisions who are unaccountable. I trust my city council. I trust you as mayor. I think you ought to lead the charge on other opportunities.
Yeah, well, I think that's important. I think that it's important for as many voices to be at the table to shape something that will benefit everybody, right? And I think that means getting people in a room. But one of the challenges that we often have is that, and I touched on this earlier, we have to make sure that as a community, when there is an idea, that all voices are heard, and that people of opposing views have to sit at the table and talk about their view and then come out with a solution that works for everybody. And that's easier said than done. Thank God I grew up as a peer mediator in junior high and in high school, and then I had 6 other brothers and sisters and 4 sisters, so I'm still known as the peacemaker of the family. But you have to do that. Otherwise, what happens is you end up with nothing, because you just have so many opposing views, and then you just talk about, oh, we might do this, we should do this, and then nothing ends up getting done. Yeah, well, I think it's right, and hopefully, right, I agree, and I think that you have to do that by making sure that you have dialogue very, very early on, so the process is not futile and then you end up with nothing, which could happen. I hope it doesn't, which could happen, but that's where spaces in the community to have those conversations has to happen, with City Hall helping to create the space, but not dominating it or running it one way or the other.
Exactly what I'd like to see, a neutral opportunity to look at all options within consideration rather than just one particular option. Would the city sponsor a neutral opportunity to hear more than one option?
We're always open to those type of conversations.
Well, we are out of time now, so I will say thank you very much to Mayor Evans and Mayor Johnson.
Thank you.